Welcome to the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Podcast with Ched Jennings of the Jennings Law Offices. This is a free resource for people who actually work for a living. Ched is going to provide information to help you file for and maximize benefits for injured workers. If you're ready, let's talk about Kentucky workers' comp and related issues. Friends, welcome to episode 1 of the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Podcast. I'm Jim Ray, and I'm here with the host of this show, Ched Jennings. Ched Jennings from the Jennings Law Offices right here in Louisville. Ched, welcome and congratulations, my friend.
Thank you very much. We're very excited about the Kentucky podcast.
I tell you what, the thing about this is you're not new to this game. You know, we've talked about this many times. If anybody saw the promotional videos that we launched prior to the launch of episode 1, how long have you been practicing workers' compensation?
I've been practicing since 1976, so over 45 years.
So, I mean, you've seen it change over the years. You've seen a lot of people come through the door who actually needed help. And
Absolutely.
That's really what workers' comp does, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons I think I like it, because you're really helping people when at times it affects their ability to make a living, and do their jobs, and support their families. And that's really significant, because I saw early on that this was an option and also an availability, but you have to have the right attorneys to make that work. If you don't have the right attorneys, then your opportunity to make that work doesn't go very well.
Well, what's interesting about what you do, the type of law you do, yes, you have to have you have to understand the law and you have to understand the workers' compensation system, but you also got to understand a little bit about medicine, don't you? I mean, because you're dealing with medical records, you're dealing with some pretty complex issues.
We do. We deal with medical questions, medical treatments, all sorts of stuff, especially when things are new. And for example, there's people that receive relief today from having acupuncture. Okay, can acupuncture be paid for under workers' compensation? Yes. So there's a lot of things you have to look at in terms of the medical field as well as the legal field when you have a workers' compensation case. I tell everybody, you wouldn't go to a baby doctor for back surgery. And the same should be true if you have a workers' comp case, you need to go to a workers' compensation attorney.
Absolutely. Well, let's for people who may be new to the Jennings Law Offices or maybe new to Ched Jennings, let's back up and kind of give them a little bit about your background. Now, you went to school right here in the state, right?
I went to undergraduate at the University of Kentucky and then went to the University of Louisville School of Law called the Brandeis School of Law and graduated in 1976.
Right. And then after that, I mean, you've had a pretty interesting career so far. I mean, it's not just that you've been practicing law. You've actually gotten into the workers' compensation, really the administrative side over in Frankfurt. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Well, I've been very honored with what I consider to be a really great career. I wouldn't want to live anything different, and I'm so happy that I got into workers' comp for a variety of different reasons. But after I graduated from law school, like many young lawyers, I was looking for work. And I knocked on doors, and I was hired over in Frankfurt, and I was actually hired as the general counsel to the Workers' Compensation Board. I didn't know a whole lot about workers' comp at the time, but I needed a job. So here I am, 26 years old, and general counsel to the Workers' Compensation Board of Kentucky. And I did that for 2 or 3 years and learned administratively how the workers' comp program is administered in Kentucky. And I think what's significant is that you have a system back then that was like part-time. You had an entity called the Special Fund, but the fellow that I reported to was the Secretary of Labor at the time, Jim Yoakum, and he really challenged me to get into workers' compensation, and also he helped develop my identity and who I am today. When I say that in terms of my feelings, my beliefs, and I'll always be thankful for him as being my boss at the time, but he became a mentor and really became almost like a second father to me. And I think it's significant. Administratively, the workers' comp program is one that is administered, and there are people in Frankfurt that administer it, but there are several, I guess, what I call pots of people and businesses and people that have an interest in workers' comp who also participate in the system. So after I worked there as the board's legal counsel, I came out and hung out a shingle and started practicing in Louisville. And in 1986, I was contacted by then Governor Martha Lane Collins, and she requested me if I would consider being on a task force that they had in workers' comp. And this task force was going to have 8 people from management, 8 people from labor, and I was going to be one of the labor representatives. And what I was given the chore of doing was designing a new system, a new administrative system. So I became very, very interested in that project, and I've been credited by many as being the person who develops and has developed the current system we have, which is administrative law judges and a workers' compensation board that administratively reviews the appeals of workers' comp cases. Before then or after that, it goes to the Court of Appeals of Kentucky or to the Supreme Court. But I was very lucky because back then we had a part-time system that everybody was very disappointed in, part-time board members, part-time commissioners, part-time lawyers handling roles in the system. And so they wanted a system that would be very accountable, that would be a claimant would have their day in court, that the insurance company would feel they had their day in court. And what was really important is that a system that would be sensitive to the reasons why the Workers' Compensation Act was developed back in 1916 and 17. And that is with the commitment that there be an early delivery of medical care, early delivery of medical benefits, an early delivery of disability benefits, and a speedy disposition of workers' compensation matters. And if you look over the years, those are the 3 themes, commitments that back in 1916 and 17, the business community and labor came together and they agreed was a better system administratively than what they had to do years ago, which was if you got hurt, you had to go downtown and file suit. You'd have to go down and file suit and it's a civil matter. And back then, if a claimant was found to be at all 1% responsible, then it was a complete bar to any recovery.
That seems like such a heavy load to try to burden, especially when you're not an attorney.
That's it. It's very, very much. So what they wanted to do was to come up with a system, again, that would be fair, an earlier delivery of benefits. It wouldn't require them to go and file civil suits to basically down in circuit courts. And what really helped bring that all together was the balancing of the interest and to make sure that there was commitment by everybody to have early pay, early medical treatment. And let's face it, somebody gets hurt, they can't wait 4 years to have their operation. They can't wait 4 years to get their paycheck or their benefits. They need it then to basically be able to pay their bills next week.
Right, and they shouldn't have to wait.
They shouldn't have to wait. So that's something I've always been committed to. And so when we did the reforms of 1986, the administrative forms, I was very pleased and honored that my ideas were well received by the governor, the legislature at the time, and it made a big difference. So all of a sudden, in 1987 and January of 1988, the new system began. They appointed 3 board members. They hired 10 judges at that time, and they got space. They had secretaries. They got the copying machines. This was back before they had internet or anything like that, and they embarked upon developing this system. And I'm very honored, really to see that's 86. It's almost over 30 years ago. At this point in time, 35 years ago, and what really it's still a part of our workers' compensation system. So I had an impact on getting it to a more accountable. So for example, when a judge renders an opinion today, they put their name on it. If it goes on appeal, their name's on it. If the board does something, their names are on it. So there's a lot of stuff, there's accountability, which I think, and there's also a lot more transparency, which is huge today as compared to the way the old system was.
And that, again, is all for the benefit of an injured Kentucky worker. And
Exactly.
That's what this is all coming back to is you're in the game. You're literally beyond knee deep in this.
That's right.
But you're making it happen.
That's right. And administratively, I was very pleased. Now, when I did that, there were 2 things they asked me not to do. They asked me not to talk about raising attorney fees, which we didn't in 1986. But the second thing was that I had to promise them that I wouldn't take a job. I wasn't going to come back to Frankfurt. And really at the time, I had no interest in that. I wanted to still be practicing cases here in the Louisville area. So the next thing that really kind of developed career-wise is that in the year 2000, Governor Patton and his administration contacted me and asked me if I would be the commissioner. And I went up and served as the commissioner. Now, the commissioner is the overall administrative head chief of the workers' compensation system administratively. And again, if you look at workers' compensation like a boardroom, you have all of what I call them players, but positions. You have organized labor, you've had the injured workers, you have the Chamber of Commerce, you have different groups of people, employees, employers, you have groups of insurance companies, you have groups of self-insureds, you have group self-insureds, and they all have vested interest in the system. And to a degree, it's exciting. What the commissioner is supposed to do is to balance the interest of everybody to make sure we have an effective system and one that's responsible to maintaining what the goals were that were set in 1916 and 1970.
That many years back. And it's awesome that you guys have been able to really hold to that mandate, if you will. This is why we are here. This is why this exists. Now let's get about, helping people.
And as a result of that, I've been active in things, and you take touch, I hate to say, but it's political, and there are politics to this. You have the legislature that'll pass laws. You'll have the commissioner and the administrative agency, the Department of Workers' Claims, that'll promulgate regulations. And it seems like you would think that if it would pass a law, then you also have the courts that weigh in. And I've argued several cases at the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and basically on workers' compensation.
And we're talking about the Kentucky
Supreme Court.
Yep.
And issues that we have in the community that need to be resolved ultimately have to be resolved legally by the Supreme Court of Kentucky. And so it's important to understand that there are lots of people and lots of areas and lots of everybody that helps make this system work. And I will tell you, it's a big system. It's one that administratively takes care of all of the injured workers in Kentucky.
Well, I know as we move forward, with these upcoming episodes, one of the things that you'll hear us say over and over if you're listening to this is the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Podcast. It's what you need to know.
Yes.
You were there from the very beginning. You helped craft the system we have now. You've been practicing for over 45 years. And you're still actively practicing now, just really, really fighting hard. In fact, there have been times in the last several years where I've run video of you up in Frankfort testifying before Senate subcommittees?
Yes. I'm frequently called by when I say the Frankfort, it could be the governor's office, it could be the Senate, it could be the House, and also I'm called by basically the people who are my friends or people with organized labor, and they've always asked me a lot of times to be the person to sit down to address the Senate, to address the House, and to talk when we need to about the issues. And I've been very pleased and honored with that. I've had an appearance on KET that dealt with workers' compensation. I think it was back in 2016, 17.
In fact, I believe that's still up on your Facebook page, maybe on your YouTube channel as well.
And I'd encourage people to watch it.
Sure.
It really was a good program. And again, it's like I've learned a long time ago, what really helps the workers' compensation community are two things: education and communication. People need to know what their rights are. They need to know what's going on. And then the communicating is very, very important. And things have changed over the 100 years since 2016. You've had other acts that have been passed, major changes. But Jim, there are laws still on the book that came from the original 2016, 2017 statute. Now, it was held constitutional in 2017, but I think it was actually promulgated or passed in 2016. But to give you an example, one of the rules that we have, laws, is that you have to give notice. If an injured worker gets hurt, they need to provide notice to their employer. Now, that law is still on the books. It's still there. But what's changed over the 100 and some odd years is that it was originally intended, and I had an opportunity to get to review some of the notes that were taken back in 1916, 1917, and the reason why they put that statute in there, the reason was to make sure that if somebody got hurt, it was brought to the attention of the employer so the employer could immediately correct the situation, immediately correct the risk, immediately fix something so nobody else got hurt.
Right. He was there again for worker safety.
But over the years, it's become one of those requirements that if an employee doesn't give notice to the employer, then the employer is able to avoid paying for the workers' comp injury. So the system itself has moved, but it's still there on the law, and it's one of our the laws that you need to know if you have a workers' comp case.
Right. And I know in episode 2, we're going to really kind of talk about, what do you do? Kind of what is the system, what's available, and how you help, your clients or just injured workers in general kind of get those benefits that they're entitled to, and kind of a broad overview of the workers' comp system. But for today's purposes, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, they could go to, they can use the phone and call us at 502-583-3882. And they can follow us on Facebook, and they can go to the website, JenningsLawOffices.com. Put an S on offices, JenningsLawOffices.com.
Right, and friends, if you're listening to this now, but if where you find this podcast, if it has a bunch of paragraphs below it, those are called show notes. And in the show notes, I'm actually going to publish that contact information there for Ched. But Ched, let's kind of come back to the conversation. You talked about how you're often called up to testify there in Frankfurt and to kind of give some explanations and kind of advocate, for the Kentucky workers. I've also seen you very active with organized labor here throughout Kentucky. We've gone to the Kentucky AFL-CIO conferences. I've seen you speak there, actually. You've been invited to speak there numerous times. I've seen you speak out at the Teamsters. I've seen you speak out there at the UAW and a lot of other locals.
Well, it's interesting you should bring that up. I think over the years, the labor leaders, especially when I served on that task force in '86, I got to know, and some of them have passed because time does go on. But the bottom line is labor, I think, saw in me where my mind and where my heart is. And I live it and preach it. And so over the years, when they have workers' compensation issues or they have things that they need to address, I get frequently called to meet with them, to talk about it, to educate, and also to provide them information to communicate with their members. And I was thinking back on this, but you're right. For example, that's my side of the fence, is the labor, the injured worker side. Now, I haven't been asked too often to appear at the chamber or some of these other people that have speakers on workers' compensation, but I probably don't wear them on my wrist or my heart, and the labor people have seen that over the years, so that's why I've been able to develop the strong friendships I've had.
No, and that's just, again, it's very easy to understand where your heart is, and it's on the side of Kentucky workers. And I love that because that comes through in the videos that you do. It comes through in the Facebook posts that we do. It comes through, hopefully, in these future episodes, so people kind of get a feel for who and what is the Jennings Law Offices. As we move forward here, I also like to think about some of the different things that you do really at the office level. Now, you're located right downtown Louisville, right?
Yes. We're in a building that's located right next to the Galt House Hotel on the river.
It's that big BB&T building, actually.
Yes, and it's also known as One Riverfront Plaza.
Yeah.
But it's the BB&T Bank building as well.
Right. And you actually, because you're located in Louisville, workers' comp is a statewide program. So you actually can handle cases for people who don't live in this area, right?
Yes, and also handle for information purposes. Now, I may recommend that they get in touch with a lawyer in their area, okay? But I can talk with them. I can synthesize their needs. Most important thing is to communicate what their rights are. And a lot of times, people, when they're initially hurt, and if you have the misfortune of sustaining a work injury, let me tell you what you feel. Number one, you're worried about keeping your job. You're worried about getting your bills paid. What's the paycheck going to be like the next week or the next 2 weeks? You're worried about the medical bills being paid. I mean, let's face it, medicals are very, very expensive today. And you worry about your family. You worry about how you're going to provide for your children, your wife, or vice versa if it's the wife that it's hurt. And you have all of these issues. And then you also have trouble getting medical care and treatment. The very first thing that the insurance companies tend to do and the self-insureds is they basically they send you to the company doctors. I refer to them as company doctors. Now, if you work at Ford Motor Company, they've got a medical department. You're required to go there. And they send you these doctors, and these are not the friends of injured workers. They're the friends of the companies. And what I always try to tell everybody, they have the right to examine you. they have the right to examine you. They have the right to require you to go there for an examination. But one thing that's really big in Kentucky is you have the right to pick your doctor for treatment.
And I think we're going to really drill down on that in episode 2 for sure. But that is one of the things, that I see a lot of people probably get wrong is they think, well, okay, the company said I had to go here, or they're trying to help me. I mean, they like me. Well, once you're injured, that relationship can change.
Yes. And there's a lot of people who are very loyal to their companies, and a lot of companies that are very loyal to their workers. I mean, I can tell you good employers and I can tell you bad employers. But at the same time, the bottom line is that, again, going back to 1916 and 17, is to get an early delivery of medical care, medical benefits, and also a speedy disposition of any compensation disputes. And that's where people understand they need to get their medical treatment. And a lot of times what I recommend is that they focus on that and give that their top priority. Now, there's a lot going on in the medical field that a lot of doctors now won't even fool with treating a workers' compensation, injured workers. And it's primarily out in the rural areas. People are having to drive miles to basically find doctors that'll handle their case or take their case. But it's also happened here in Louisville. My GP belongs to Norton's group, and they won't treat a workers' comp case. They're not wanting to. And actually, the fee schedules for workers' comp is higher than Medicare. It's that they have to fool with things like utilization review, peer-to-peer analysis, and these are things that they don't want to fool with. They want to medically treat. They want to basically say, hey, I recommend this person gets an MRI. They don't want to be told no by some insurance adjuster. So that's the key there. You have to get the treatment.
Well, with your years of experience, you also know the docs out there who would be willing to help that worker, or at least work with them, at least initially, if nothing else, and to make sure they're getting the medication they need, make sure they're getting the treatment they need, and make sure that they're getting the care ultimately they need. Because this injury, I mean, let's face it, this might be something that, okay, we'll put a splint on it or a cast, and in a few months you'll be back to work. On the other hand, some of these things could be career-ending.
And that's the sad part about it. How bad is the injury? What impairment rating he comes or she comes away with from the AMA guidelines. And the next thing is what their restrictions are and their limitations. And I've got a lot of clients who basically insist the doctors not to put them on restrictions so that they can get back to work. They're told what they should avoid, but they want to get back to work.
Well, and I just think that's the work ethic that most people have, is that, you know what, I feel better when I'm able to earn that paycheck, and I'm able to, we put so much of our identity in our work, right?
Right.
And so when you're not able to do that, you somehow feel some anxiety that is not really your fault, but yet it's there, right? So I think a lot of people, even though they're injured, would probably be better off if they could get back to work, and most of them probably want to do that.
Well, I tell everybody, and it shouldn't be this way. I don't want to say it's a game, but you got to think of it about this way. The insurance company or the self-insured, what they don't pay out, they get to keep. Not personally, not the adjuster.
Right.
But they get to keep. And so there's an incentive there for them to try to frustrate the injured worker, not to pay for certain things, to deny surgery. I can't tell you the number of cases where I've had where they pay for everything, and then when it comes time for a surgery, oh no, we find this not work-related. So there's a lot of stuff going on that the people, the injured workers, and I hope they listen to these podcasts because they'll better understand what the playground's like. Yep. And that's the big thing they need to address.
Well, and that's why if you've sustained an injury, if you've been hurt at work somewhere, if something's happened, you probably ought to go speak to an attorney. If nothing else, just to kind of understand what your rights are at the time. But, it's one of those things. Don't go into this blindly because really the stakes are a little too high.
Yeah, we at the Jennings Law Offices, we don't charge for telephone calls. We don't charge for people reaching. Many of the unions have my mobile numbers and give my mobile numbers to their members. We talk to everybody, and what we try to do is to get them to come into the office to talk face-to-face because it's really important. Over the phone, sometimes people are calling from their house with the kids or grandkids in the background, and you just really, the power of communication is one where you do much better when you're in person.
And it's one of those things. It's not that they have to. I mean, some people maybe way out in one of the rural counties and can't make the trip in. So yes, it can be done that way. If you've got FaceTime, you could probably do at least a video call somehow. In fact, the entire workers' compensation system is really, really, because of COVID, adopted this whole telemedicine, and that works in the legal field as well.
It's really it's really changed. And right now, in workers' compensation, you're right. They are doing their hearings, their get-togethers, status conferences, depositions of injured workers. They're doing it by Zoom, and we do interview people over the phone with Zoom, especially the ones who are unable to get to the office.
And again, just to clarify, Zoom is really just a video conference. It's a video call that you can do right there on your computer. Some people know the term. Some people are maybe not familiar with it.
Really, from any device that has the app, like, for example, the iPhones, the Androids. And some of the most important thing, that's why today I could take a case from, say, for example, Bowling Green, and my client at that particular point in time can have a hearing, can have his deposition, can have everything done through Zoom. And that's kind of where they're probably going to stay. I don't know if they're ever going to go back to in-person. I mean, I hope we get the pandemic behind us and we're able to do in-person things. Don't get me wrong. But what's really helpful is that a guy, for example, the injured worker in Ashland has trouble finding lawyers to represent him because for their hearings, when they did them in person, they'd have to go to either Florence, Frankfort, or Pikeville.
And that's a haul, especially if you've got a back injury. The last thing you want to do is sit in a car or a truck for a while.
Well, it's also an expense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they also normally have to have somebody miss a day of work, like their wife or a good friend, to take them. And so this can then be done from their home, as long as they have a Wi-Fi and, again, the app on their Android or laptop. And that's made it much, much easier for people in some of these rural areas to have access to the workers' compensation program.
And again, it's their right. It's their right under Kentucky law to have access to this entire system.
Yeah. We want to make it an easy access. We don't want to make it difficult. Because, for example, the fellow in Ashland who'd had to find an attorney to take his case, when the attorney knows, well, gosh, this case is probably not worth that much, maybe I've got to go to Frankfurt twice, take a whole day out of my system or my schedule, where I may only making a fee of maybe $1,000, $2,000, that they're going to have trouble finding attorneys.
It's almost a disincentive.
It is. And over the years, I've seen this. I've seen a great reduction, in number of attorneys in the state actually handling these cases. Now, I like to tell everybody that years ago, when they released the attorney fees, I ranked 50th in this state. And last time I ever saw one here recently, it showed that I was number 2 in the state. And so that shows you the difference. Not that I'm doing that much more business, it's that the number of attorneys who are in there are not as many practicing workers' comp.
Right. And as long as we're talking about fees, I mean, realistically, the attorney fees in a workers' compensation case are capped, aren't they?
They're capped for injuries occurring.
So it's not that you're making a killing on their cases.
No.
That's why you're ranked number 2. No, it's just the volume.
The biggest case that I settled for an individual was $1.4 million. Okay, and my fee was capped at $12,000.
Right.
So it's less than 1%.
Exactly.
These are not cases like car accidents where you lose a third. These are cases, the attorney fees are controlled by statute. If I fail to get any money for my client, I don't get a fee. And the big thing is that it's controlled by statute. It has to be approved by an administrative law judge.
And again, the thing I like about this is because our system was set up the way it is, those fees are capped because the money ought to be going to the injured worker and that person's family.
Exactly. And that's the key that I always try to tell everybody when we talk about attorney fees. When you increase attorney fees, you need to also increase benefits for the injured workers, because then they're coming out with less and they shouldn't be.
Right. The worker should win.
The worker should get any increases should get the lion's share of those increases.
I think so. Ched, I tell you what, for episode 1, it sounds like you've done this for a while. So I want to congratulate you on the launch here of episode 1 of the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Podcast. But again, I appreciate your time, and I hope the audience has found this to be insightful. I think anytime we start a new podcast, it's important that you kind of get a feel for who's the guy behind the mic, who am I listening to here? And it's Ched Jennings. He's been around. He knows the system. Heck, he helped build this system to some extent. And he's been practicing in it for, again, over 45 years. So, Ched, first of all, well done. 2, congratulations. I can't wait to get you back in the studio for episode 2.
Just remember, Jim, I helped build the system, but not the benefits. That's the big difference at this point in time. I basically helped the administrative system.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it then for the episode 1. From the Jennings Law Offices, I want to issue everybody a big thank you out there. I appreciate you listening to us. And from the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Podcast, just remember, it's what you need to know. Thanks for listening to the Kentucky Workers' Compensation Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back soon with more information. In the meantime, if you like what you heard, please consider sharing this on your social media channels. You'll be doing your part to help Ched support injured Kentucky workers.